Good day everyone, I am Jayan Enriquez. Today I am going to discuss the week 4 module. What is genre? Genre is a category of art that can be identified by form, content, and style. In literature, genre is the classification of a work of writing by the type of writing or content. So, what are the five major genres of children's literature? So, we have poetry. So, this genre consists of writing that follows meter and rhythm for every line written. Another feature of the poetry genre is that writing is organized into schemes such as stanzas, meter, and rhyme. Subgenres of poetry include epic poem, narrative, romantic, dramatic, and lyric. So we have also a non-fiction. So the non-fiction category is a genre in which writing ranges from academic papers to creative works. Non-fiction can be used to inform and it can also be used to tell a narrative story, like in an autobiography or memoir. We have also multicultural literature. So, in most cases, describes how people lived in different parts of the world. Reading this type of fiction often allows us to learn about different cultures and beliefs. It usually presents a fairly accurate representation of the culture it portrays and is most likely to avoid stereotypes or beliefs about a particular group that are oversimplified or based upon generalizations. So we also have the poetry. So this genre consists of writing that follows meter and rhythm for every line written. So another feature of the poetry genre is that writing is organized into schemes such as stanzas, meter, and rhyme. Subgenres of poetry include epic poem, narrative, romantic, dramatic, and lyric. So lastly, we have the traditional literature. So it is genre of literature in which stories have been passed down within a culture through generations, both through oral tradition and in written form. So now, let's proceed to fantasy. So what is fantasy? Differentiate high fantasy and low fantasy. So fantasy, it is a type of story or literature that is set in an imaginary world. So often involving traditional myths and magical creatures and sometimes ideas or events from the real world. High and low fantasy are the two main categories of fantasy. So, high fantasy refers to epic fantasy rather, which is set in an alternate world. It typically includes lots of magical elements, fantastical creatures, and unusual technology, whereas low fantasy is when magical creatures and elements intrude upon the regular world. So now let's proceed to the types of fantasy stories. So first we have animals. So short stories that are similar to fairy tales but involve animated animals as the main characters. So second, we have toys. In toy fantasy stories, narrators bring their beloved toys to life and transform them into animated beings that can live, talk, think, breathe, love, and behave like human beings. Third, we have unreal world. It is an imaginary or fanciful or seemingly so. Um, an unreal, so it is an unreal situation. We also have the ghost stories. So, a tale in which such elements as ghostly visitations and supernatural intervention are used to further the plot and a chilling, suspenseful atmosphere. So, we also have the time warps. A time warp is an imaginary spatial distortion that allows time travel in fiction or a hypothetical form of time dilation or contraction. Lastly, we have magic powers. Magic in fiction is the endowment of characters or objects in works of fiction or fantasy with powers that do not naturally occur in the real world. Magic often serves as a plot device and has long been a component of fiction since writing was invented. So this time, let's proceed to a science fiction. So, what is a science fiction? So, science fiction, it is a genre of fiction in which the stories often tell about science and technology of the future. So, it is important to note that science fiction has a relationship with the principle of science. So, these stories involve partially true, partially fictitious, lost, or theories of science. So, next is the historical fiction. So, it is set in real place during a culturally recognizable time. The tales and the action in the story can be a mix of actual events and ones from the author's imaginations as they fill in the gaps. So characters can be pure fiction or based on real people. So, realistic fiction creates imaginary characters and situations that depicts our world and society. So, it focuses on themes of growing up and confronting personal and social problems. This genre portrays characters coming to understand themselves and others. So, this time, let's proceed to the types of realistic fiction. So, we have survival and adventure, misery, humor, animals, sports, friendship, family, growing up, disability, foster homes, and loss. So let's proceed to the picture book. So what is a picture book? A picture book combines visual and verbal narratives in a book format, most often aimed at young children. So with the narrative told primarily through text, they are distinct from comics, which do so primarily through sequential images. So, what are the types of multicultural literature? So, multicultural literature includes books that portray people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos. They also, however, include books that help to portray religious groups other than Christians like Jews, Catholics, Muslims, Mormons, and Amish. So let's proceed to the samples books of children's poetry books. So what are the samples of children's poetry books? So we have here a Revolting Rhymes by Roald Dahl in 1982. And then When Green Becomes Tomatoes, Poems for All Seasons by Julie Foliano in 2016. Then The Random House Book of Poetry for Children in 1983. And we also have All the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss 1990. So, what are the fables? So, a fable is a story that features animals, plants, or forces of nature which are anthropomorphized. A fable always ends with a moral. This is the lessons that is intended to be learned through reading the story. One of the most famous fables is The Hare and the Tortoise. What are myths? Myths are stories that are based on tradition. Some may have factual origins while others are completely fictional. But myths are more than mere stories and they serve a more profound purpose in ancient and modern cultures. Myths are sacred tales that explain the world and man's experience. So, what are legends? A legend is a genre of folklore that consists of a narrative featuring human actions, believed or perceived, both by teller or listeners, to have taken place in human history. Narratives in this genre may demonstrate human values and possess certain um, qualities verisimilitude. What are tall tales? So a tall tale is a story with unbelievable elements related as if it were true and factual. Some tall tales are exaggerations of actual events. For example, fish stories such as that fish was so big, why I tell ya, it nearly sank the boat when I pulled it in. So, next, what are the realistic tales? So it is a genre consisting of stories that could have actually occurred to people or animals in a believable setting. These stories resemble real life and fictional characters within these stories react similarly to real people. What are folk tales? Folk tales are stories in the oral tradition or tales that people tell each other out loud rather than stories in written form. They are closely related to many storytelling traditions, including fables, myths, and fairy tales. Every human society has its own folk tales. These well-known stories handed down between generations are an important way of passing along knowledge, information, and history. So what are trickster tales? Trickster tale in oral tradition worldwide, a story featuring a protagonist, often an anthropomorphized animal who has magical powers and who is characterized as a compendium of opposites. So now we are on the last part of the discussion. So, what are noodlehead stories? So, are it is a folktales that involve a well-intended individual that often lacks common sense. At times, they make fake words too literally, and their responses typically lead to very foolish actions. The humor is always gentle in nature, which makes the stories enjoyable for all. So what are the Mother Goose stories? The story of Mother Goose is possibly the oldest story to be turned into a pantomime. It dates back to an ancient Greek legend about a goose that laid golden eggs. It is also one of the earliest pantomimes seen in Great Britain nearly 200 years ago.